2 Samuel, the partner to 1 Samuel. 2 books, 1 volume. Last week in 1 Samuel, we said, "Where is your heart?" We talked about the morning phrase, waking up each day and saying, okay, I choose God's choice for me. We talked about the rejected king versus the ideal king. We saw Saul in his rejected state and the beginning of David being that ideal candidate for the king. The rejected king was the one that would choose to make their own path, and they would run their own plays. They were gifted only by what they saw in their own merits and their own ego. And though they thought they were godly in their mind, it was not produced by their actions. And yet the ideal king was the opposite of that. They were chosen directly by the hand of God. They were gifted because they chose to accept the fact that they had God's Spirit, and that was what made them so. And then because of that, their godliness was by a nature of their heart. If you'd like to this morning, you can get on your YouVersion app again, and there is an event on there that you can follow along with the points in Scripture for this morning with 2 Samuel. Now, if we're going to take a tie into this, let's go back just a second. 1 Samuel was the book of Saul, and now 2 Samuel is the book of David. Saul being the rejected king, David being the ideal king. As the first one ends and the second one begins, we see Saul's death occur, and the future of Israel is kind of in a bleak state. They've just been destroyed in battle by the Philistines. It's their first official earthly king has now died, and they are now scattered with no leader. But they're about to enter what the Jews still call the Golden Age. And the Golden Age is a 1,000-year empire that God is going to start and create through David. And that's the why behind this. Why is it the Golden Age? Well, David, the man after God's own heart. We kind of hinted on that a little last week, but that's what we're going to uncover more in depth today. The 2 books are like 1 volume, 2 ways to focus on where we're headed with 2 Samuel. First of all, just a recap of that outline, okay? But the 2 Samuel part, you see King David, his kingship and stuff in chapters 2 through 8. Then you see the story of David and Absalom. You see that is a major concept of this in 9 through 20 with his son Absalom. And then the greatness of David that is revealed in chapters 21 through 24. Maybe a better way you can look at this, you could look at like specific stories based on chapters. 2 Samuel 6, it's David and the ark. Chapter 7, the Davidic covenant, and then chapter 11 is David and Bathsheba. These are all just kind of an outlining points to give you an idea of major thought process, major storyline that affects the nature of the entire whole as we go through this. Now, looking at this from the idea of the rejected king versus the ideal king, 1 Samuel's theme was, God may pick you, but he's going to bench you if you run your own plays. So how does that translate as the rejected king into the ideal king? Like this. We've said that David is a man after God's own heart. So our theme for 2 Samuel is this: God has a heart for those who have a heart for God. That's the idea of the ideal king. And there's that tie to the heart again. That seems to be a recurring idea here. But the key word this time that references into this is king. If we're going to have an ideal king, an ideal candidate in this position, there has to be this idea of what that kingship is within the nature of the heart and the choices made. We already know how the heart's tied to it. Specifically, we want to cover how that heart makes that ideal king then. I.e., for David, the man after God's own heart. David was going to be a catalyst for Israel. But how many of you could sit here and tell me, oh yeah, okay, I know David. Who was he? Where did he come from? What's the significance of his road to the kingship? Why would he be chosen? Why was he the man after God's own heart? David was the youngest son. Think about that for a minute. The youngest son. Typically, most of the honor fell to the oldest son. Not in this case. We know God chooses by different means. He was the youngest son. He was the lowest then in the order of the family. But here's the catch. what God saw. David was the most gifted. David was the most gifted. Now, he battled with his family on this status. Okay? He was the shepherd. He was put out to pasture to take care of the family's flock. Lowest in the pecking order. I could picture the fact that David probably got picked on by his brothers. There was probably more than one opportunity that they had to play a little prank or a joke on him in some way or shape or form. He probably didn't garner a whole lot of respect from them growing up. That's what happens when you're the youngest. How many youngest siblings do we have in here? How many of you can identify with some of that? Yes. Like every hand, waving. The funny thing is David, even after everything started to occur and as God's chosen to take over the kingship of Israel, he started to battle this again, but he battled it with Saul. So here he's coming off this battle with his family, but for 10 years he was chased by Saul. There were times when Saul wanted to kill him because Saul knew. Samuel told him, "You've been replaced, man." So in the midst of this, he's chasing him. Saul labels him an outlaw. So in some respects to the nation of Israel for these 10 years, David's an outlaw. He's hunted. There are wanted posters up for this guy. And all of this he endured to become the greatest king in the history of the nation of Israel. So who was and who is King David? Look at 2 Samuel 5, 1 through 5. Then all the tribes of Israel came to David at Hebron and said, "Behold, we are your bone and flesh. In times past, when Saul was king over us, it was you who led out and brought in Israel. And the Lord said to you, 'You shall be shepherd of my people Israel, and you shall be prince over Israel.' So all the elders of Israel came to the king at Hebron, and King David made a covenant with them at Hebron before the Lord, and they anointed David king over Israel. David was 30 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 40 years. At Hebron, he reigned over Judah 7 years and 6 months, and at Jerusalem, he reigned over all Israel and Judah 33 years. Again, point out the key words spoken here, okay? They have anointed him, and he is now king. David is King David. He embraced it, though, at a different level than Saul did. We said he was the most gifted amongst his brothers. And those gifts present themselves, well, I'm going to give you, I would say that there were a lot of gifts that David had, but I want to break down 3 very remarkable ways in which David was highly gifted. And those remarkable gifts are this: he was gifted politically, he was gifted militarily, and he was gifted spiritually. Politically, his gift was a high level of political strategy. How do we know this? Well, David's savvy for the political is greatly exemplified in how he chose to make Jerusalem the capital city of this nation. Of all places, he chooses Jerusalem. And this was politically genius. In 2 Samuel 5, 6 through 10, it says, "And the king and his men went to Jerusalem against the Jebusites, the inhabitants of the land, who said to David, 'You will not come in here, but the blind and lame will ward you off,' thinking, 'David cannot come in here.' Nevertheless, David took the stronghold of Zion, that is now the city of David. And David said on that day, 'Whoever would strike the Jebusites, let him get up the water shaft to attack the lame and the blind.'" There's almost a sarcasm in there. "Who are hated by David's soul. Therefore it is said, the blind and the lame shall not come into the house. And David lived in the stronghold and called it the city of David. And David built the city all around from the middle inward. And David became greater and greater. For the Lord, the God of hosts, was with him." Look at this. Look at this. He goes into Jerusalem to the stronghold. He takes down the Jebusites who are like, "Man, you ain't coming in here." But the Lord, the God of hosts, was with him. He knew that, and he went in there and he took it, and then he built the city around it. Now, strategically, okay, obviously we see a military tactic in there, but strategically, here's the move making Jerusalem the capital city and realizing this is where everything needs to stem from. This city was on the border. It was in a strategic location that was perfect, an access point for Israel and Judah. It was a way to make a united front within the country and the nation. And on top of that, at the peak of the city, that's the stronghold, the city of David, the palace. That's where it's at. And it was a viewpoint. David could look down and look over all that the Lord had put under his reign and his leadership. So there were multiple reasons here in this strategic location for choosing Jerusalem as the capital city. He had a true gift for political strategy. David took this opportunity, and just alone with the city, he began to unite the kingdoms of Israel. We also see within the political decision, as I said, that David's second gift arises, and it arises many times during his reign, and that was his gift of military leadership. David had this continuous enemy from the beginning until the end. He was constantly battling with a wonderful group of people we call the Philistines. Now, the reason why the Philistines were a sought-after group is, honestly, there was a difference in that there was the iron and the bronze. And a lot of people would have the opportunity and access to bronze. Bronze was a big deal. That's how you could make your weapons, your armor, and things of that nature. But then the Philistines discovered the idea of using iron. Well, iron was much stronger, much sturdier. So you go into battle with iron swords and shields versus bronze swords and shields, and you are breaking your enemy down, because that iron is much sturdier. And people knew that. So people would battle the Philistines. They would negotiate with them to get the iron stuff. But the Philistines were not real big on sharing stuff. Let's just put it that way. They never learned that lesson as children. They didn't listen to mommy and daddy about sharing and being good with your stuff. So David would take them on. He knew the benefits. Again, here's a political nature to this as well as his military leadership. So he takes on the Philistines on multiple occasions, but he does this against individuals as well as armies. They stated, Saul has killed his thousands, David has killed his tens of thousands. Saul did not like that back in the day. David had a military leadership gift. And when he took on individuals, we think of a primary story in that. The great warrior of the Philistines, Goliath of Gath. And David took him on. No problem. And he took on stupid amounts of armies. Like the Jebusites, when he took Jerusalem from them, and of the continuous battles with the Philistines over the ages. Look at 2 Samuel 5, 17 through 25. When the Philistines heard that David had been anointed king over Israel, all the Philistines went up to search for David. But David heard of it and went down to the stronghold. Now the Philistines had come and spread out in the valley of Rephaim. And David inquired of the Lord, "Shall I go up against the Philistines? Will you give them into my hand?" And the Lord said to David, "Go up, for I will certainly give the Philistines into your hand." So David goes out and he does this. I may not read through word for word all these scriptures. Sorry, Dave. So David goes out there because God says, yeah, I got him. I'll deliver him in your hand. So he goes out and he does this and he battles them and he wins. And I find it extremely funny. The Philistines, in their hatred for David, go and repeat the same action. Again, they go down to that valley and they line up and they're ready. They're going to, nope, we're going to take you this time. David goes, yeah, what do you think? And God goes, nope, you're fine. He goes out and beats him a second time, twice in a row. Okay? I picture this, I don't know what the time frame is, but I picture this in the moment. I picture this as being David going out there, beating them. They all scatter. They regroup themselves. They come back. And a week later, he's like, oh, man, I got to go do this again. Like, I don't see a big time frame in this. Like, I'm wondering if this was like in a week's time, he goes out there and goes, all right, you guys think the third time's a charm? I mean, do you really want to try again? David had extremely good military leadership, but did you see how that's tied to the fact that he went, hey, God, am I going to beat him? That's a key note to think of here when you think of the military leadership. David had that gift of military leadership. That military leadership was based on a foundation. And that foundation is that third remarkable gift. He had the gift of spiritual awareness. This is where we start to begin and understand that true heart of David, where we discover the character of the ideal king. And the first part of that character is a heart of gold. A heart of gold. Obviously, there's metaphor in that. It's not literally gold. David had a heart of gold. And you think about this when we look at 2 Samuel, and it's in chapter 6, verses 1 through 17. David again gathered all of the chosen men of Israel, 30,000. David arose, went with all the people who were with him. He wanted to bring them up for the ark of God, which is called the name of the Lord of hosts, who sits enthroned of the cherubim. And they called the ark of God on a new cart and brought it out of the house of Abinadab, which is on the hill. And Uzziah and Ahio, the sons of Abinadab, were driving the new cart with the ark of God, and Ahio went before the ark. Okay, so here we go. He has a heart of gold, his spiritual awareness. He knows what it is to have the presence of God before him, around him, surrounding him, with him. David and all the house of Israel were making merry before the Lord with songs and lyres and harps and tambourines and castanets and cymbals. And when they came to the threshing floor of Nacon, Uzzah put his hand to the ark of God, took hold of it, for the oxen stumbled. And the anger of the Lord was kindled against Uzzah. And God struck him down there because of his error, and he died there beside the ark of God. This is an interesting point here. See, because I think a lot of us at times do not consider the fact that at that point in time, the Ark of the Covenant was the literal dwelling place of the Spirit of God amongst Israel. There's a reason why they had poles of cedar stuck through the rings to carry it, or they put it on a cart. Because the presence of God was right there. To touch that was to touch God himself. And that to me speaks volumes in David's understanding and his spiritual wellness, to tie it to the political and the military. The concept of the celebration of the presence of God, but to have that go before, to have that presence in and amongst him at all times. That's the power of the presence of God. Uzzah was just simply trying to save it from falling off the cart. He knew the sacred nature of it, but I think in some respect, he knew what he was sacrificing when he did that. David was angry because of it. And it caused him to be afraid of the Lord that day. I think this is another part of David's heart of gold. He understood the nature of the presence of God being there and the power of that. But in that moment, he's recognizing, I have to fear this God because of the power that comes from him. There are aspects of David, as we read through this stuff, you start to understand why he was a man after God's own heart. David's reverence, his understanding for the purpose and the place and the meaning, the sacred dwelling place of God among his people. I don't know if you guys, I want to give you a little bit more. Maybe this will help you understand. I do want to take a little tangent here and tell you a little bit about the Ark of the Covenant. I think it's important for us to understand this on a little bit deeper level. It needed to be a renowned and sacred thing. It needed to be treated with the respect, with the glory that it deserved, because it was the presence of God. And what happened is Eli and his sons, back in 1 Samuel, they mistreated the whole process and they manipulated. They made their own choices. And because they mistreated it and they broke the law, that's why the Philistines were allowed to come in and take it. And they took it. But here's the funny thing. They took it to 3 different cities within their land. And they put it into a major temple of their gods. And overnight, they came back the next morning, and their god, Dagon, had fallen on its face, and the head had been cleanly cut off. The kind of disrespect it was for your God to be on its face and for the head to be cleanly off. See, that's what you did when you conquered surrounding nations back then. You took their gods and you decapitated them. You took them off and said, see, our gods are stronger than yours. And here they simply set the ark in the temple across from Dagon, and there it went. It makes its return at this point in time. After all of this, it ends up making its return back to Jerusalem under Saul. Or not Jerusalem, sorry. It makes its return back to Israel under Saul. But the people really pay no mind to it at this point. It's been gone. They haven't really worried about it. They haven't gone after it. It comes back. They don't pay no mind to it. And Saul doesn't celebrate its return. David, on the other hand, as we saw in that passage, with instruments and people, they're dancing, they're singing, they're celebrating the presence of God through the ark. Think about all of that for a second and apply it now to the thematic idea of this book, that God has a heart for those who have a heart for God. Such a major difference. And the history begins to paint the opposite of this picture, but David brings it in 180 degrees different light. Are you starting to track with me here on the difference between the rejected king and the ideal king? He made the direct points regarding the necessity of the presence of God. David was in awe of this. And he writes about this in the Psalms, in Psalm 132, 3-5. I will not enter my house or get into my bed. I will not give sleep to my eyes or slumber to my eyelids until I find a place for the Lord, a dwelling place for the mighty one of Jacob. David understood the necessity of God being near to himself, the need to draw near, to be near, to know God more. This is the heart of gold. It's a heart of God, the heart that desires God's heart. I talked about this last week, Psalm 42:1, 63:1, 139, 23, and 24. David is crying out. He's saying, I need you, God. I need the presence of God. And search me, God. Make sure I am where you need me to be. The hardest part about this is that heart, just like all of our hearts, is still a human heart. It still brings about the struggle, which is why we have that morning phrase, trying every day to remind ourselves, I choose God's choice for me. Because even this ideal king, a person after God's own heart, can aspire to that heart of gold. But because of our humanity, because of David's humanity, we walk with feet of clay. We can walk with feet of clay. And this ideal king, so gifted, so powerful, so brilliant, so seemingly perfect, these molded feet, they can betray that heart. So easily can they betray that heart. 2 Samuel 11:1. In the spring of the year, the time when kings go out to battle, David sent Joab and his servants with him and all Israel. And they ravaged the Ammonites and they besieged Rabbah. But David remained in Jerusalem. Why wouldn't David go? It says it's the time for kings to go to battle. David's always had a good military strategy. He's always taken everything on full force. But this time, why? He just decides not to go. He sends his troop. He even sends the ark before them. But he makes a choice this time to stay behind. And you want to look, you go, do you not see, David? Do you not see and understand based on all your previous experiences, man? You and the ark, you're tied together. There is a strength and a bond in the two of you. See, God himself in the presence, when Eli and his sons mistreated, he willingly went with the Philistines after he was mistreated by them. And David did the same thing when he was mistreated by Saul. He sought refuge with the Philistines. The ark made 3 different stops while they were with the Philistines. And David, he did the same thing, 3 different stops. The Philistines, they ended up kicking the ark out because of what it was doing to their temple. And guess what? They realized how dangerous David was, and they kicked him out too. David additionally made 3 stops in Jerusalem. Guess what else made 3 stops in Jerusalem? David, do you not see? When you are around the ark, you flourish. But sending it ahead with the army while you stay behind, what did you think was going to happen? What do you think was possible? And I picture David up on that balcony, on the highest of heights in his palace, looking out so beautifully over everything and thinking to himself, wow, I am blessed. But the ark is gone, and in the midst of that praise for God, all of a sudden he's distracted. He's distracted by this rooftop a couple blocks over. And he looks over and he's like, wow. I got to be careful with this. I got to be careful. And so he calls someone in and he's, hey, I want to get to know some more of these people that are around the palace. These are good people. These are my friends. These are my people. I like hanging out with them. So, this house over here, who's that? And they convert, oh, yeah, so-and-so. Oh, that's cool. Right? This one over here, yeah. What about that one a couple blocks over there? Oh, that's Uriah's house. Oh, yeah, Uriah, that's right. Yeah, Uriah is one of his 30. It's one of his 30 powerhouse men. He knows who Uriah is. But he plays coy. And he says, yeah, and he's married to that woman, Bathsheba. Yeah, Bathsheba. Uriah's out fighting right now. Why don't you invite Bathsheba over? I want to have her over for dinner, and I want to check in, see how she's doing, make sure she's all good, let her know an update on her husband. So Bathsheba comes. They have dinner and dessert. And now, in the absence of God, David has removed himself from the presence of God, and a skewed point of view, a justification of his authority has now occurred. 2 Samuel 11, 2-5. It happened late one afternoon when David arose from his couch and was walking on the roof of the king's house that he saw from the roof a woman bathing, and the woman was very beautiful. And David sent and inquired about the woman, and one said, is not this Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite? So David sent messengers and took her, and she came to him, and he lay with her. And now she'd been purifying herself from uncleanness. Then she returned to her house, and the woman conceived, and she sent and told David, I am pregnant. Hey, David, look what you've gotten yourself into. Your feet have betrayed you, and they have betrayed your God. But David thinks his political and military gifts are going to help him cover this up. There's almost like this sarcastic justification in how he's trying to do this. See, he ends up calling for Uriah to come home from the battlefield. And he calls him home because he thinks, oh, I got this idea. I'm going to call Uriah home, say, man, you've been fighting hard. You've been doing a great job. I'm so proud of you. Go home, take a rest, take a retreat from this for a couple of days. Go home, be with your wife, enjoy your wife, have fun for a couple of days, and then you can go back out. He's thinking, we'll do this, and Uriah will sleep with his wife, and it'll be all like she got pregnant by him, and it's all good. I'm going to cover it up. But Uriah looks at him and goes, I'm sorry, my king, there's no way I can do that. The rest of the men out there sacrificing, doing what they're doing, it would not be right of me to have that break, to enjoy that pleasure, and I couldn't do it knowing that my men are out there fighting for what we believe in. And so Uriah goes back to the battlefield. David's like, okay, I got to come up with something else. And so he sends word to Joab and he says, put Uriah on the front lines where the fighting is the fiercest. And Uriah is killed in battle. And so now Uriah is out of the way. And so now that it's out of the way, David's like, okay, there, that got taken care of. But now I got to take it further. I got to go one more step to make this look more pure. 2 Samuel 11, 26 and 27. When the wife of Uriah heard that Uriah, her husband, was dead, she lamented over her husband. And when the mourning was over, David sent and brought her to his house, and she became his wife and bore him a son. But the thing that David had done displeased the Lord. See, and that's just it. It's like we can do everything we can to cover it up amongst the people around us. But we ain't going to cover nothing up from God. And in this moment, this is where I'm sitting here. I'm going, David, what are you doing, man? What are you doing? How many of us could fill in that blank? We can all fill in that blank in the front of that. Luke, what are you doing, man? We can all do that at some point in our life. You can put your name in there. And it's like banging your head against the wall. And in 2 Samuel 12, the prophet Nathan comes to David. And he goes, hey, I got a story for you. There was this rich man, very wealthy man. He had all of these amazing things at his disposal. The choicest flock, the choicest bulls, amazing house, incredible friends, everything he could ever want. And he had a very special guest coming for dinner, and he wanted to create a very special dinner for that person. But this wealthy man was also selfish in what he owned. And just across the way lived a very poor man. A very poor man who had one sheep of his own, a special sheep that he loved and cared for, and that was almost like family to him. And this wealthy man, not wanting to give away anything that he had, one night he stole that sheep and he killed it, and he prepared that for the feast for his special guest that was coming, and took away all that other man had. And David is filled with rage. And he looks at Nathan and he says, I want you to bring me this man so that he can earn the just rewards that he has completed because of his choice. And in 2 Samuel 12:7, Nathan looks at him and goes, he looks at him and goes, David, you are the man. And trust me, this wasn't one of those things where Nathan was looking at me, hey, you're the man. No. David, you are that man. You are that man. And it hits David like a 2x4 over the head. Oh, no. It is all over. It is done. I am ruined. Oh, the fool that I have been. But his true response is this. In chapter 12, verse 13, he looks at Nathan and he says, I have sinned against the Lord. All of a sudden, nothing else matters. All of a sudden, David knew what happened to Saul at that point when it came to sin. David understood what had happened with Saul. And this is a significant difference, though, between Saul and David here, between the rejected and the ideal king, is that Saul was just fearful, and he tried to cover his rear end in any way that he could. But David was acknowledging the direction of the fault, his acceptance of what he'd done, the realization of his choice in the moment. But the difference here, nothing else mattered because he'd sinned against God. This is the man after God's own heart. But that's just it. This is that true heart for God being shown. This is where you don't realize that even in his feet of clay, even in his lowest moment, in the sin that he had committed, David was honoring his heart after God. Because of this, look at the response. 2 Samuel 12:13, the second half says, and Nathan said to David, the Lord also has put away your sin. You shall not die. I believe it's because David went, I have sinned against the Lord. If you're seeking in a way that you possess the heart of gold, but you end up with steps that are formed by feet of clay, it is the utmost importance that you remember this: God forgives. Don't misunderstand this, though. Forgiveness doesn't negate consequences, okay? Our actions still bring consequences. And for David, there was fallout. First, that child, that initial pregnancy with Bathsheba, that child died. David prayed earnestly for God not to follow through with that one, but that one was followed through. And then in chapters 13 through 20, we see the family issues. We see Amnon and Tamar. Amnon is one of David's sons. Tamar is his sister. He is flat out in love with her. He wants her bad. And what happens? He pretends to be sick. He asks David, I want Tamar to come and feed me meal. I want her to take care of me. She does, and when he did, he overtook her and he raped her. So then Absalom, his other son, gets really hacked off at Amnon. And what's he do? In revenge, he kills his brother. Kingdom conspiracies begin to surround David's reign. Murder, manipulation. Everything you could possibly think of. There is fallout all over the place. So now what? What's the legend of David now going to sing? A heart of gold, but set on feet of clay. And chapters 21 through 24 begin to describe that legend. After all of this, what does God do? He puts David into the Hall of Fame. He puts David into the Hall of Fame. And David, he revels in the glory of God. And again, unlike others, he acknowledges this from his heart, that heart that is known as the one after God. 2 Samuel 22:20, he brought me out into a broad place. He rescued me because he delighted in me. And 23:3-5, the God of Israel has spoken. The Rock of Israel has said to me, when one rules justly over men, ruling in the fear of God, he dawns on them like the morning light, like the sun shining forth on a cloudless morning, like rain that makes grass to sprout from the earth. For does not my house stand so with God? For he has made me with an everlasting covenant, ordered in all things and secure. For he will not cause to prosper all my help and my desire. David recognized and acknowledged, even in the low point, the only way he exists is because he knows that God is in his heart. He knows that that is the purpose. He knows that God forgives. Here, David raises a broken hallelujah before the Lord. And even though broken, he does it nonetheless. And he does this in such a strong way. After everything with Bathsheba, he writes this in Psalm 51, have mercy on me, O God, according to your steadfast love, according to your abundant mercy. Blot out my transgressions. Wash me thoroughly from my iniquity and cleanse me from my sin. David has this pattern here, a pattern that I think is part of the restoration process when we go through something like this. There is an acknowledgement of what has happened. There is a request made of God, but then there is action that follows that. David says later in verse 10, create in me a clean heart, O God. Renew a right spirit within me. Cast me not away from your presence and take not your Holy Spirit from me. Restore to me the joy of your salvation and uphold me with a willing spirit. And he's going to put it to action because he goes on to says, then I'm going to teach others. I'm going to show them the power and the glory of God that happens, even in the low points. Because he believes deep down in the depths of his soul, the truth. The truth that imperfection and weakness are what God can use to pull us up. Reveal his strength that we may boast in that and not in ourselves. I choose God's choice for me. God's choice. Not my choice, God's choice. Where we choose to put forth before us that need for Jesus. And how can all of this be? It's because our relationship with God is more important than anything else we could think that we would put before it. Even family. And David learned that. David learned that. And by all means, take time to focus on the family. David did that too, we need to. But there is only eternal merit to focus on the family if you first focus on the Father. David was, in recognition of this, he accepted that in all things God's choice was for him. And he could build a family just like you build a family. Everything that you dream of here on earth, okay? You could be like David. You could see all the blessings, look out and go, wow, this is incredible. But honestly, it'll mean nothing at all if it doesn't begin with a focus on God. I struggled this weekend. So I had one of those moments with God where I was sitting there, I had my message ready, I was excited. I knew that God had produced something that was a great continuation from last week. And I'm sitting there, and I hear him say, hey, I want you to do this. And I went, oh, yeah, that could be cool, but you want to know something? I'm good. And he said, oh, I think this would, I really think you should use this. I'll consider it. Hey, okay, fine. And I can tell you this morning, this is tough because I don't want to do this. I don't want to. I'm going to see if I can get through it. But I'm going to share a song with you. Because I was listening to a recording of this as I was going through my message. And I think maybe in some way, shape, or form, what's said in this song is what God was trying to convey to me in my learning experience with this as a lesson of understanding what it means to be like David and to try to be someone after God's own heart. You got to be willing to say, okay, God, not some of me, not this part of me, all of me. How many of us are saying that? From the honest depths of my heart, guys, I'm running on empty. I got nothing left in the tank right now. I'm so drained. Over the past week, I can't tell you how many of you out of the blue have come up to encourage me, or a text message, an email, a phone call. Reminded that even if I'm on empty, not everybody is. Reminding me how much I love this place. That I will pour out everything that I have, even if it means I'm going to hit empty at one point. Because I want to be able to walk alongside you guys, and I want to be able to say, God, all of me, all or nothing. Every single one of us has experiences like David of brokenness in some way, of desiring that heart of gold, but of dealing with feet of clay. Something was broken. It might be family, another relationship, something fractured or fallen apart, and we seek that heart of gold. We seek after the heart of God. But like David, that seemingly unforgivable mistake is made, and we cry out, oh, to get a do-over. To start the whole thing over again. But we don't get to, do we? And we wonder at times, does that make me farther away from God? Have I become disconnected from Him in some way? And man, have I been feeling that. That God reaches down into us and He says, hey, look at David. This is my example of the ideal king. All other kings have and will be judged by this standard. And are you, am I, someone after the heart of God? A question for you. What's the one thing which if you have it, you don't need much else, but if you don't have it, not much else matters? The answer, a heart for God. David, a man after God's own heart. That heart for God. And God had a heart for him. Because God has a heart for those who have a heart for God. So we finish where we started, this one book of 2 volumes. Where's your heart? Let's pray. Father, take all of us. Hold nothing back. Let it be the cry of our heart, because a true heart of gold, a heart after you, something like David, recognizes that we are going to fail, recognizes that we are human, that sin, unfortunately, is a nature we have to deal with. But God, with your Spirit, with the choice to run after you, to seek after that heart of gold, our feet of clay still get to find forgiveness. And if we acknowledge from the beginning, Father, the truth of what that is, the acknowledgement, yes, we will hurt other people, but ultimately, I have sinned against the Lord. Father, you forgive, you lift us up, you carry us, you set us back on solid ground, and you push us forward. I don't know about anybody else, Father, but I truly hope someday that I walk into your presence and you say, welcome to the Hall of Fame. There's no greater reward, no possible thing that could be given in any lifetime that would be more worth giving all of us to you than to know that we have a seat in the Hall of Fame of God. Be it by your strength, your admonishment, your will, and our ability to say that I choose your choice for me. It's by your authority we ask and pray these things. Amen.